You're now live.
Okay, we are now live, and it's the Committee on Finance. We are moving forward. We have removed at least one of our topics for today in order to get the agenda in line. So we're going to start with S214. This is the valuation of timeshare properties, and Josh Hanford from Community Housing and Community Development has to leave by 2, so I told him we would put him on first. And there's Josh. Okay, he's also jumping around my screen. Okay, Josh, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. It's 3 o'clock, but I understood.
That's right. All right, I'm totally confused today.
I wish I had another hour back today as well. So good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. For the record, Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. I could be brief. I've looked quickly at this bill, and I don't believe there is much impact on regular long-term rent residential housing stock that this would have. I'm not here to present a position from the administration or from tax. I think was asked to look at it that way. I really don't see either way much impact on the regular residential housing market, with one small exception. If there is some approach that is taken here, and that would be, based on the professionals that know what this is going to do to timeshares, if it has the result of reducing units that are available to the public for travel and vacation here, that could have a spillover effect on encouraging more short-term rentals. And we see that every time a hotel is opposed and doesn't get built, whether it be in Montpelier or other places, that market is picked up by short-term rental conversions. And so my only comment would be, if whatever is done here results in less of these resort-based timeshare condo units being unable to stay in business and be available for the traveling public to vacation in, that will get picked up by the short-term rental conversions out there from people's homes. So happy to answer any questions, but I don't feel like I have much more to add at this point.
Okay, any questions for Josh at this point? Okay, I think that's all we wanted to hear, was if you thought there would be any initial. And stay tuned. You're welcome to come back anytime if you see us going astray. Okay. I'm going back to Tom Vickery. And Tom, where is Tom? There you are. Here. Yeah, you just took Josh's place on my screen. All right. So tell us what's going on. We understand that these have been being settled by agreement. There's been a settlement. They haven't gone to court, but there's been major impacts on some towns' grand list. Just tell us what's happening and how you as an appraiser see it.
I'll give you a little bit of the history first. In 1983, timeshares came into Vermont, and Stowe was one of the first ones to have the timeshares. And we had the legislation that was passed by the House, which is 3619, which deals with timeshare projects. A timeshare project is a project that one owner does not own the unit, but it's owned by a number of different owners, and they call them timeshare estates. It can be by a week, it can be by a quarter of the time period. It can be set up any way the association wants. The legislation that was passed in 1983 helped the towns in the fact that we didn't have to list every single deeded timeshare estate. We could appraise the unit, and that was good for the towns. It was good for the industry, because the industry did not want to have the timeshare estates go up for a tax sale, and wanted to have the timeshare estates on an average cost for maintenance fees and not on or taxes, I should say, and not on a tax by what they paid for the timeshare estate. Before I get into what's happening, a timeshare condominium and a wholly owned condominium are vacation-owned condominiums. They are not residential, usually residentially owned. In Stowe, probably 95% of the condominiums are owned by vacation people, and the same thing with Smugs. So it is a vacation resort condominium, not a residential like you would have in Burlington or South Burlington. There is a difference between a timeshare condominium and a wholly owned condominium. If I am a wholly owned condominium, which means I own a unit in a project, the association that governs the project has the right to make sure that the external parts of the building are kept up and the common areas are kept up. The owner of the condominium unit itself has to maintain his interior components of the structure of the unit. In a timeshare, the association controls everything. And a timeshare is like a hotel. You rent for a week. You have maid service before you get in, maid service when you get out. The interior furnishings are always kept up. The interior of the units are kept up. So there's a lot of maintenance that goes into doing that because it's used extensively. Whereas in a wholly owned condominium, the owner of the unit has the control over the interior of the unit. And to give you an example, in Stony Brook, when we did the reappraisal in 2012, I had to go look at every single wholly owned unit because there was a big difference in variation from one unit to another. Some people updated their units, they were over 20 years old, other people did not, and there was deferred maintenance. So there's a lot more deferred maintenance that can happen with a wholly owned condominium, whereas in a timeshare condominium, because it's a timeshare, there's a reserve for replacement, and each owner pays a maintenance fee for the care of that condominium and the taxes and the care of the common areas. What's been happening with the timeshare industry, it's gotten a black eye. A lot of owners who have owned them for a period of time no longer want to pay the maintenance fees. The maintenance fees can be excessive because it's not only the uptake of the exterior, but also the interior. And it's also for the taxes. And what we found is, and what you've heard if you listen to TV, timeshare owners want to get out of their obligation of paying the maintenance fees because they've outgrown the use of the units that they're doing it. When they bought the condominiums, they paid a price, they had young children, they liked it, the children grew old, and the use that they were putting it to wasn't the same that they wanted when they first bought it, and they found that there was no market to resell them. And a lot of them walked away from the project, and the managing entity ended up with the ownership. And I'd like to kind of show you what's happened. In Stowe, with Stowe Village Green timeshare units, a whole unit would have been assessed at 1,350 square feet would have been assessed at 144,000. A smaller unit, 1,150 square feet, would have been assessed at 123,900 on our reappraisal in 2012. The timeshare unit of 1,350 square feet was assessed at 98,400, 68% of the unit assessment, and the quarter share was only assessed at 67.5 or 46%. And that's because the resales of these quarter shares and the timeshares, they were going down over the years. And in Stowe, we kept our way of assessing correctly and lowered the value of those timeshare units. What's happening now is that those timeshare units are going for zero in some cases, going for 5,000 or 15,000. And the value was coming down to such a low degree but the value of the unit is still there. And what was happening in Village Green, they were assuming the ownership of the people that walked away, and they would sell them as a whole unit. And in Unit 5A, which would have been in at 67,500, they sold for 220,000 in July of 2020. 14C sold for 215,000 in 2020. 7A sold for 299 in April of 2021. 10C sold for 340 in 2021, and Unit 10B sold as 355 in 2021. These were the fully time-shared units. The quarter share units that we had in for 67,500, they would end up getting those, or the owners would get together and sell the units. And the quarter shares were sold as a whole unit for 155,000 in 16, 148 in 19, 153, 750 in 2019, and 285 in 2020. So there was a mechanism that the timeshare units could be sold as whole units. And it usually was with a managing entity getting them, or the units themselves, if they're quarter shares, getting together and selling them as a whole unit. In 2017, we were affected in smugglers to reassess the timeshares. And we looked at what the timeshare resales were, and there were very few, and they were very, very low at liquidation levels. We decided to appraise them as whole condominiums and did that. And I'll give you an example on Kestrel's. Kestrel's was owned by Smugs at that time. Club Wyndham had come into Smuggler's Notch and had bought up most of the unsold units. In June of 2015, each project has a clause in which if 75%, so it depends on each project is different, but in Kestrel's, if they had 75% of the timeshare estate owners wanted to sell it as a whole unit, they had the right to sell it as a whole unit. And in June, the Kestrel's 2 was withdrawn from the planned unit development, which was a timeshare development, and was allowed to be sold as a whole unit. And Club Wyndham bought it, and they paid over $3 million for it in August of 2015. We tried to find out what that $3 million encompassed, because we also understood that they were acquiring all the other unsold units. When we did the reappraisal, we came up with a value on their unit of $2,070,000. We couldn't come up to the $3 million looking at other whole units. But we appraised the other 2 units that were time-shared, Kestrel's 1 and Kestrel's 3, at the same amount, $2,070,000. That held in 2019. They did not appeal, and 2018 was not appealed, but in 2020, it was appealed. And they had an MAI appraiser come in and just look at the resales and established on a 3-bedroom timeshare condominium that the unit was only worth $66,000 compared to, in this case, $2,070,000. It was looking at liquidation resales, and we're appraising all the rest of the town at fair market value. We ended up settling that case, and this is going to help Jill Remick explain later, because if we hadn't settled that case out of court, and we ended up settling it for $990,000, not at the $66,000 per unit, we settled them at $165,000 per unit. And we did that because if we didn't do that, we would have been liable for the education fund, tax burden if we didn't settle by December 31st. And it was going to be a very sizable amount because we had 22 timeshare projects appealing. And to save the town money, we had to settle. The settlement was not based on any proof of value. It was a settlement. The appellant knew that he probably wasn't going to win at his $66,000 per unit value, and was willing to settle too. But it was still a lot less than what a whole unit was. And we had 19 of 22 projects were lowered in 2019, 2020. In 2021, we had 2 projects go further, and they went further because they weren't unsatisfied with the settlement. The attorney wanted to get into and find discovery on Smugs on certain questions that he had to answer, primarily over how the management fees had been established, because that was the biggest criteria that people were arguing about. He could not get any answers. But again, the town had to make another settlement, and they lowered those 2 projects by another 13% and one by 23% or 26%. Again, with no proof of value. There is no way right now that we can prove what a timeshare is worth. The town hired an attorney in the 2020 appeal, and we hired an MAI appraiser to come in and try to establish a value of a timeshare unit. He was unable to, in his mind, to come up with a way of appraising them based on the resales and based on the fact that he could not get income information from either Club Wyndham or from Smugs. He could not establish what an occupancy rate was. To do a cost approach, he had a problem not establishing what the value of the unit was worth, but there's a residual land value, and he was unable to come in with a value for that. So if we don't come up with a better answer on how to appraise a unit, and the law that was passed for 3619 says we are to appraise the unit, not the timeshare estate. The timeshare estate can be a means of arriving at a unit, but right now they're all liquidation values, where the people want to leave the timeshare project and get away from it. We did a survey during the process of the appeal, and of about 90 surveys that we sent out, we got about a 10% response. Most of the people, almost all the people that responded said they really enjoyed Smugs. They enjoyed their vacation times when they were there, but the kids have outgrown it, and they were outgrown it, and they weren't using it that much. And to pay a $2,000 management fee, which is what the management fee was, they did not think it was worth it anymore. I might add that in Smugs, when they sold the units 20 years ago, they gave the owners the right to ski or the right to use the Smugs facilities in the summertime that was going to only last for 20 years. And the people could not pass on that right if they were going to sell their timeshare unit. So there was a big disincentive for any new buyers to come in and buy the timeshares. And with a black eye that's out there on timeshare condominiums, it's not working right now. People aren't buying them. And you see a project like Club Wyndham, who comes in, and they aren't selling timeshare estates, they're selling vacations. And we do not see the price of those vacations. We do not know what the occupancy of their units are that they have. We have no information from them. They've been not very coming forth with any information as far as what the value of their condominiums are. They have appealed in the past, both in 2017 and 2020, but they dropped the appeals. We did not lower their values. But the timeshare estates, the ones that were those, we did stipulate to a value, primarily because of the fact that the town was going to be with a very high tax liability to the state with the education fund. But there was no proof of that value. And right now, we have no way of really proving a value for a timeshare estate. The resales are showing liquidation values. They are not showing a fair market value. The condominiums themselves have been kept up. They're well maintained. They're in good condition. They aren't worth $66,000 a unit. And I think the appellants know that. They were very happy when we made the settlement. I think 19 of the 22 did not want to appeal further. They were very satisfied with it. Is it the right answer? I don't think it is. I think it should be appraised as a whole unit condominium, just the way all the other vacation condominiums are being used up there. And I think I sent in the chain of emails I sent that you have there. California has a law that's similar to what we're trying to do here, where if you cannot prove the value, then you can appraise them as whole unit condominiums. So we're asking that you consider that you look at it. If you don't look at it, both the town and the state education fund is not going to be getting the money they should be getting from these units. I think that's all I have to say. I've sent out a lot of stuff. I gave you a little bit of a history of what's happened in the past, how it was established. That Village Green in 1984, they appealed the valuation that Stowe put on their timeshares. And we did it not based on what they were selling for, but we made a deduction. We were about 60% of what the gross sellout was. And they appealed that, saying it should be as a whole condominium. We prevailed when it went to Superior Court. It never went further than that. We have got a history of court cases, and I think also State Appeal Board, where they've gone on the resale value. But the resale values right now are really not realistic of what the units are worth. And we have to have a measure of value that we can measure that can be rebuttable. We can come up with a value and they can rebut it based on the whole condominium with the condition, the quality, whether there's a development factor involved or not. That's all arguable. It is not going to get down the level of that settlement, and it's going to be closer to a whole unit condominium. So we're asking that you, I think, defined that we're to appraise them as whole condominiums, just like we are all the other vacation condominiums. And that's the request that we're making from the Cambridge listers and Stowe too, and probably all the other resort condominiums in the state that have timeshares that are facing the same problem. Do you have any questions? Oh, I got one other thing. In the Smuggler's Notch timeshare project, I put in what's happening with Club Wyndham, and you'll see on the bottom of that in Tamarack 1, they own 36% of the timeshare estates. Tamarack 2, they own 28%. Tamarack 3, they own 35%. Tamarack 4, they own 29%. Tamarack 5, they own 43%. Tamarack 6, they own 21%. Sycamore A, they own 14%. Sycamore B, they own 11%. Sycamore C, they own 37%. We did not get these out until we could go to Discovery and find out what the percentages are. And those are percentages that are back in 2020. Those percentages are greater now because more people have given up their condominium. And we have no proof of how we evaluate those. And how do we, they're going to end up probably owning most of them. And it's a waiting game for them because they don't really have to buy them. When a person wants to get rid of their timeshare estate, they're going to give it up. And Club Wyndham's going to end up owning them. And it has value to Club Wyndham. Club Wyndham has not appealed the values that we put on them, which has been similar to a whole unit condominium. We feel that the timeshare should be valued the same way. So I thank you for the time to come and express this. I hope you've learned something. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Okay, so Tom, the base problem is timeshares and wholly owned condos, same building. The timeshares are actually better maintained because the maintenance company updates the kitchens and bathrooms over, 20 years, whereas a wholly owned condo, you may have a 20-year-old fixtures, facilities. There's no guarantee that they're as well maintained. But the value, because the people that bought timeshares are aging, like most of us. Apparently their kids don't want to buy 2 weeks in November. So they're doing a cost benefit and saying, I'm walking away from this because I've paid off my mortgage and it's costing me $2,000 for maintenance. So the values dropped off because this form of business has become passé, this form of ownership. And but the building is still there and still looks just like the one next door and is probably better maintained than the one next door. So another entity has been coming in and buying up these condominiums. And I think you said about $66,000. And I think we could find a whole lot of Vermont families that would like to buy a $66,000 condominium anywhere in the state. I defy you to find one that's habitable for that price. And the other way you could go would be an income kind of a evaluation, but you can't, they're not selling time, they're selling vacations, point systems, but the new owners aren't telling you how much, what the income they're making off of these. So you don't even have that information to go on. So you don't have anything to base raising those appraisals because they've been bought dirt cheap. But now they're being reused and not resold. They're being not even rented. It's a new business model. And we don't have a way to appraise the value of those buildings, but I think common sense says that they're appraised too low right now, especially in comparison to the same building standing next door. And more of them are being bought out. So your request is that we just say you evaluate it like you would any other building, condition, number of rooms, square footage, the things you would use, and that that's what the appraisal is. And then we have another little issue with appeals time, and I have a feeling I can guess why we put that in, but this is really an extreme situation, and it has really put the towns in a position where they had their hands tied. They took the risk of owing everything to the Ed Fund if they lost an appeal. And so they really had to settle or face a big financial risk. That we may be able to fix. But have I got the basics of what's going on right now?
Yes, Senator, you expressed it very well. What we want to see is a way of measuring what the value of these are. They would have a right to appeal. They would have a right to abut the value we come up with, because you can argue on the condition, you can argue on the location, you can argue on the value of the amenities that go with it. But you're looking at comparable properties. And in Village Green, you have both whole ownership and timeshare ownership and quarter share, all in the same type of buildings, all in the same type of units. And they're mixed. Up in Smugs, it's not really the case. Most of the projects are either all timeshare or all wholly owned. We need a way of measuring, that's a fair way of measuring the value of these timeshare estate community developments. And we think that it has to be done with as a whole ownership at this point.
Okay. Senator McDonald, do you have a question?
Yes, we're dealing with, I believe, apples and oranges. When you own a traditional condominium, you are appraised when the appraiser comes in and looks at the place and determines what its value is. But when you are a corporate owner of a property, do you not have the option of being appraised on its replacement value, its sale value, or its income producing value? that you're not locked into any of those three, but you as the owner have the opportunity to seek one of those three. Is that correct?
It's very hard to do a cost approach on a condominium. Almost all the time, we assess condominiums by a market approach. The income approach could be used, but what we're finding is that if I have a timeshare estate and let's say Club Wyndham owns quite a few units and Smugs owns quite a few units, they're going to rent their units before they'll rent your timeshare. So you don't have as good an occupancy rate on those, and the income approach is not going to be as reliable because we don't know how readily they are rentable. And we were unable to find out that information. We tried. The MAI appraiser tried. And he basically was butting heads with both Club Wyndham and Smugs, trying to get that information.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I was trying to ask, how are commercially owned properties appraised? Do the property owners have some ability to ask to be appraised on their fair market value, their sale value, or the commercial value to earn money? Is that basically the rules under which those corporate owners get appraised? Or am I wrong? Because that's kind of, we have to know the answer to that question before we try and solve the problem before us.
Okay, Tom, what would you normally, you have a building, and these buildings are not necessarily all owned by corporations. Some of them are still owned by 5 individual owners that are still either renting out their timeshare or, okay, you probably got some Airbnbs floating around in there. So it isn't like everything is owned by a corporation. Some of these are owned by one owner. Some of them are owned by, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, maybe a dozen owners. But Tom, if these are all bought out by a business, I know there are different ways an appraisal can be done. I know sale value is what most places go, but you can also do an income-based approach. And I assume you can do replacement value. That's how the state wants their things appraised in Montpelier, but I think that is that essentially correct?
Yes, it's correct. What I want to repeat is that traditionally, timeshare estates have been appraised on a resale of the timeshare estates.
Right.
Right now, that's not a good measure to value a property. And we have to have that definition changed because we have a history in the state of going to Superior Court or going to state hearing officer where that's been done in the past. And we basically have to look at it as a whole unit condominium so that we can change past laws and come up with a measure that's going to be reasonable for these properties that are owned by timeshare estate owners. It's when you say a corporation owns it, you take like Trapp Family. Trapp Family does not own the units. They have a very clear interest in making sure that the units are kept up. And if they're disgruntled owners, they usually take them back and will try to resell them or try to rent them. But it's very hard for a timeshare estate owner by himself to rent it. And at Smugs, if you were going to rent through Smugs, it was going to be a 40-60% split. So you get, Smugs kept 40%, you kept 60%. And it didn't mean that you could rent it every time you wanted to rent it. It's a diminishing chance of renting depending on the people that want to go there. So it's not an easy way to do from an income standpoint. It's doable if it was like a hotel and you can get the information from the owners of the hotel. We can find sales of whole unit condominiums that are similar in character as far as location, as far as condition, as far as quality goes and amenities goes, and put a value on the timeshare condominiums comparable to those. That's a much easier way of establishing a value and is probably more reflective of what their true value is worth.
Okay, when
So,
I
Madam
heard,
Chair, in
yes,
the case, in that case, does the condominium owner have a deed to that condominium?
yes.
They
Yeah.
own that, they have a deed to it.
They own
Is that-
the
is that-
week, Senator McDonald, they own the week that they bought, they purchased.
No,
they have a
for
deed
an
to
wholly
trust
owned
the
That's a
building.
condominium.
That's a
Oh.
timeshare, not a
Yeah, a
Not a-
wholly owned.
condominium that if I have a wholly owned a wholly owned apartment-like building called a condo somewhere, do I have a deed for that? Am I the owner of record?
Yes, if
Or
you
is
bought a
someone else-
unit, if you bought a unit in a project, you are the owner of that unit.
Okay, but these are not
Okay.
apartment-like. That may be, you're not buying a building with 5 units in it. You are buying what, if it were in Montpelier, a block over from me in Freedom Drive would be considered a single-family home. It's a condominium unit. It's owned by, it's not an there's some units that have 4 separate condos in them, but they're owned
Madam Chair,
by
I
the person.
apologize. I apologize for this, which is why we need to use the same terms. When you own a certain number of square feet in a bigger building and it's yours and you own it by deed, you are treated for appraisal purposes similarly to those people who own a house on an acre.
Yes.
We agree on that?
Yes, and you have a measure of sales that show
Okay.
what that value is.
Yeah.
So now we're dealing with a separate animal that may be owned by a group of people that own it by fortnights or weeks. And are they not entitled to argue at tax time and ask to be taxed on what they paid for it, its replacement value, or what their earnings are? Because they do not own it like a home with a deed, and they own it as a business proposition, or are they not entitled to argue for those 3 options?
In the question of the timeshare estate, the timeshare estate owner does not have the right to appeal. It's the association or the managing entity of the whole project that has the right to appeal.
But if Wyndham only
If you
owns
look at the
2/3 of it,
statute that was
Maybe if
passed,
you go on, it might help clear this up, because I've got other witnesses, and we're not going to vote it out today, Senator. And it's
well, thank you.
complicated.
If we clear it up,
Okay.
what the rules are, then maybe we can move ahead to solving the problem.
Well, I think what I heard Mr. Vickery say is those 5 people don't own the building. There is an association that owns the building, and they sell them 2 weeks a year, every year. So they own the 2 weeks. And you used to base it on what those values were. But because people aren't buying town shares now, those values have radically decreased. The building is still the same, maybe even better. But the timeshares, the income value is not there when they're being resold. I think that's the dynamic. And the question is, where do we go from here?
So, Madam Chair, one more comment and I'll bow out.
Please don't send it, because a couple times it's looked like you were headless. You have,
Mr. Vickery's dealing with the dilemma that when Mr. Vickery goes in and says, hey, we'd like to tax you based on your earnings in this building. Wyndham says, we're not going to show you our earnings. We don't want you to see our earnings, because if we show you the earnings, maybe you'll tax us on our earnings. Wyndham would seek to be taxed on what they paid for it, which might have been $1 or nothing.
Mhm.
Or Wyndham will go in and say, we only own 11% was the low and 70% was the high of some of other
Yeah.
apartment-like structures. So, I guess they can appraise them as high as they want until Wyndham shows them the numbers.
Well,
Wyndham doesn't want to show them the numbers. So, but I'm done.
okay. I want to go on, and as we work our way through, I hope it'll become clearer. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if Mr. Vickery could help me understand where we ever went off this path. I mean, if it was just a straight up rental unit, which in some ways it is, we would tax it as a non-residential rate based on its market value. Is that the confusion here, that they're arguing that its market value is very different than if it was just my condo that I rented out, to somebody for a whole year?
The argument on the appeal in 2020 was not on what the rent was. It was on what the timeshare estates were selling when they're trying to get out of the management fees. And those values were zero in some cases, $1,000, $500, in some cases up to $3,000 or $5,000 per week. And the MAI appraiser for the appellants took what they were selling for an average, and he came up with $3,000 for 22 weeks of $66,000 for a 3-bedroom, 1,700 square foot condominium that was in good condition. And that was his argument, just based on resale values, what the timeshare estate owner could sell it for. What we're saying is that timeshare estate that wants to sell it, the owner wants to sell it, he wants to get rid of the management fees, and he wants to dispose of it. He wants to liquidate it.
So let me just cut you off, because this is, I think, like Senator McDonald, maybe others, we're just trying to understand I mean, I'll just say, to me, this seems outrageous, and I want to help fix it. And there's distinct problems. But, if I'm a landlord and I own a condo and then I go to sell it, the sale price is based on whoever approaches me in the open market, presumably, and that influences the tax. But there's something here that, and this is where it doesn't make sense. The timeshare unit, which is just a fancy way of a rental unit that's held by well, it's not really a rental unit, but it's these ownership structures versus how I think of our tax system, which is, a homeowner, your residential or non-residential. Why wouldn't we? I mean, there's nothing to prevent the timeshare people from selling to somebody that wants to move in there, at which point they would sell for the market price of a condo, of a residential condo, and then we would tax them appropriately. And I guess I'm trying to, is that what we did, and then they appealed, and then they made this sort of elaborate scheme that brought down their tax bill?
What I tried to show you with the Club Wyndham owning such a large percentage of the projects, of some of the projects up at Smugs, in order to have all the timeshare owners vote to say that we want to sell it as a whole unit, you have to have 75% in the Kestrels that are going to say, yes, let's sell it as a whole unit, and we'll split up the value and distribute it among the timeshare estate owners. When you have a Club Wyndham that comes in and owns 25 to 50% of the timeshare estates, they aren't going to vote to sell it. They're going to let you keep getting out of it at no cost to them, and they end up acquiring it, and they end up acquiring more value for very little money. And that's the problem. right now it's a time element, and the people that don't want to use them anymore is vacations, and they want to
I
sell them.
see.
There's no market for it. And the entity that is controlling the association is going to end up owning it, and they have control of the,
And so they get to turn and say, look, I bought this for $10, but really they only bought it because the owners were like, get me out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's now being reflected in a tax rate. Okay, thank you. That's just
Okay.
this little piece that's been not clear to me. I appreciate it.
Okay, Senator Brock.
This apparently is a problem that is nationwide, not just solely here in Vermont. Have you run across any jurisdictions anywhere in the country that's come up with any innovative solutions to solve this?
I quoted to you what California has done, which is what you're trying to do here, appraise them as whole unit condominiums. Every state has different laws. I tried to find out in Florida. Florida basically says that if you cannot prove the value, then you can go back to the original cost at 50% of what the original cost was, which is not value. But in Florida, they raise the values every year by a percentage. So they haven't got the problem that we have here in Vermont. We're unique, and I think there has to be an answer. Every state's a little bit different. California, I evidently had the same problem and approached it the way we're trying to approach it here. I will try to get more information. I've asked Jill to do some research and try to get an answer of what other states are doing and how they're affecting the valuations.
This might be someplace we could try NCSL and see if they've got any read on this. Okay, but I assume that timeshare, if you go to Florida and you age, you can still walk on the beach and enjoy the sun when it's like it is here today. Whereas if you're going to Smugs, unless you're skiing, it's cold, and that, it's probably more physical ability dependent than just being in a warm climate. So we may be getting a heavier hit. Senator Bray.
So I don't know if we get to mix different tax types, but I'm just wondering if part of the problem is the property is being claimed to be less valuable, but it's generating income because it's being rented, et cetera. I mean, is there some sort of compensatory income that we end up getting through like rooms and meals tax? Is there another way of, you might have the same revenue in the end, but it's based on its use as opposed to as a piece of property? Okay,
I'm going to hold that question because I think that we'll get the tax people in. I'm watching our agenda time, and we're already over, and I've got 3 more witnesses. And Jill, if you can hold for a few minutes, I'm going to let Jim Mazur go, because then you're our technical advisor, and then Chuck will do you. And we are obviously not solving this today, so I'm hoping we can just get a quick walkthrough, and then we're going on to genetic information and life insurance. So it's a varied day. So Mr. Mazur, just you tell us who you are, who you represent, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jim Mazur, and I'm the president of the Smugglers Notch Share Owners Association. The acronym is SNOSA, and I represent the interests of 5 homeowner associations at Smugglers Notch, the Eagles, the Owls, the Falcons, the 2 Kestrel's buildings that Tom Vickery did not talk about, or he did talk about as well, not the one that Wyndham owns, and Trailside Highlands. All told, we are 64 units, 2 and 3 bedroom units. And I'm glad I'm following Tom, because he's laid out a groundwork for my testimony. And I think I can continue your education process by going through what we own. And what I will say right out the outset, especially to Senator McDonald, is do not feel bad that you're having trouble gripping what these people own, because we have owned the Smuggler's Notch for 20 years. My wife is an attorney. I have a lot of real estate attorneys, and I can tell you that it took us 19 years to figure out exactly what we own. Okay, it is not easy. All right, but just a little bit about our share owners, because the theme that I want to put forth to your committee is as difficult as this situation is, I don't want everybody to lump together timeshare owners into one group, because it really is not the case, and especially at Smuggler's Notch Resort. And I think Tom alluded to that there were quarter shares and things like that at the Stowe Village Green. And that is exactly the kind of owners that I am representing. I am not representing the 2-week timeshare owners. Those are in different buildings. Our buildings, the owners have purchased 16 to 17 weeks, third of a year, and some of the buildings are split where they sold half the year. Okay, so our share owners originally started out, most of them, buying the 2-week timeshares at Smugs, and to tell you the truth, we loved it. We couldn't get enough of Vermont in 2 weeks. It just I live in South Florida, and I can tell you the heat here in the summer, it was a nirvana to come up to Vermont. And we just fell in love with Vermont, as did, I would say, almost all of my fellow owners that we have. In the evolution of the timeshare business, the resorts went ahead and accommodated us. They develop buildings where you could buy a third of the building, where you would own 16 weeks, not straight through. You would have access at various times. It's a set schedule, and you would know when your vacation was. But the idea is that we weren't satisfied with 2 weeks. We weren't buying this on speculation. We wanted to spend more time in your great state and in your great community. And I want to put this right out front, that it is not our intention to avoid paying a fair share of the town's costs or education costs. We agree that it's terrible what is going on in your cities and with the education base being lowered. We want to be good neighbors, but we also want to be treated fairly, and we want to pay property taxes according to the true nature and value of our property. And the key words here are fair share and true nature and value of our property. So in order to continue the education, Tom Vickery has done such a great job with the traditional 1 and 2 use. I want to then talk about our group, our 5 associations, which are 64 units. Like I said, we started out 2 weeks. Obviously, the more weeks that you purchase, the larger investment in the property. The Eagles building that I purchased in, I bought a half of unit for $300,000, and I would say that was about 20 years ago. Okay, the pricing was pretty much the same based on the number of weeks that you bought, and those values really held pretty solid in our group for many, many years, mainly because based on the current appraisal systems where you base it on sales. In Eagles, we did not have a single sale of our 12 owners for 15 years, at least 15 years. So we were assessed at a certain value, and we stayed at that value through those 15 years, and we paid the tax. And we felt like it was a fair valuation. So what is the difference between us in our group and our timeshare access and owning a fee simple ownership of a condominium? Senator McDonald, this gets right to your point. And I think I can clear it up with 3 bullet points. We do not have unfettered access to the property or our units. We only own the right to use our units during the designated weeks. My wife and I thought we owned the furniture in our unit. I thought I owned half of Eagles 1. We do not. We only own the access rights for 25 weeks to use that condominium. The owners of the interiors and the whole building, as Tom Vickery said, are the combined group of the association. All the owners own a piece of my unit based on their number of weeks that they've purchased. Okay, we do not have a key that will unlock the front door anytime. We don't have the right to change anything in the unit or the building. We can't decorate. We can't even leave any clothing there. We have a separate owner's closet. All the furnishings and the personal effects are the associations, and they share it with no one. They can choose to, I mean, as far as a full condominium, owners of a condominium, they have unfettered use. All the furnishings and the personal effects are theirs. They share it with no one, and they can choose to leave personal items wherever they, whenever they like. It's their place. This feature alone creates a significant difference in the value of a condominium unit compared to a timeshare unit. Second bullet. The shared ownership feature created by our declarations, as recorded in the land records, is an encumbrance or a restriction on the property that automatically devalues our units in the same way a restricted covenant can devalue any property. The declaration makes it difficult, if not impossible, to change the building from a shared ownership building to condominiums, even if most of the owners in the building wanted to do so. I think Tom said it was 70 or 80%. I think that is totally correct from the declarations. So what happened in Kestrel's 2? Why were they able to vote in and sell to Wyndham? Well, here's the history of Kestrel's 2. They were part of our group. But unfortunately, and I'm not going to get into the details as to why, a number of the owners, there were 18 different owners in that building, a number of those owners went delinquent on their assessments. And it got to be a very, very bad situation. And under, I think, and I don't have the facts because it's not publicized, but under some sort of agreement, and maybe the litigation was potentially threatened, but somehow the owners of the resort, Smuggler's Notch, went to Wyndham and said, would you be able to, if we helped you and got the declarations changed, would you be able to buy these buildings and we could relocate some of the people to the other buildings? And I can tell you that it was a major, major process, but it got done. And the proof of the pudding here is that originally, that whole building sold for $3.1 million. Is that correct, Tom? 3.140, right. And then they went ahead and appealed down to $2 million. And again, I don't know what the basis of that appeal is. But I think at this point in my testimony, although I'm not here to talk about Wyndham, it's important to differentiate the use that Wyndham is using with those units than the units that we have purchased to have vacation. Obviously, we're going to rent our units out when we're not there if we can to help us defray the cost of the maintenance of the assessments. It's quite a bit, if you can imagine. If it's $2,000 a week and I own 25 weeks, you can just do the math and see how much investment I have to make to own that 25 weeks of access.
No, it's $2,000 a week, not $2,000 flat.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, right. Anyway, so we have a certain use of our of what we're a purpose of why we have purchased. Wyndham has purchased these, and they're basically they're operating it as a hotel is the best way I could put it. They have custom owners that have bought points, unlike us, where we have made Vermont our choice of vacation. The typical Wyndham customer buys points as you would frequent flyer points and has a choice to go anywhere around the country that Wyndham has a resort or internationally where Wyndham has a resort. So there is a different type of model that is being used, and Wyndham is the I guess they're a hotel operator is like I said, is the best way I could clarify it. The owners do not have access every single year to a unit that they would purchase at Smuggler's Notch. They would have the ability to take a 2-week vacation there. So that I think is an important differentiation to make with this committee compared to the 1 and 2 unit owners, weak owners that are purchasing the rest of the units. Okay, the third bullet is that the condominiums have certain deeded rights to access the amenities at the resort that are not included in our share ownership. So in other words, you buy a condominium at a resort, you own the whole place. You have invariably purchased deeded rights to use the pools and all of those kind of things. We only have deeded rights in our building to use the hot tub that's attached to our building, or a pool that we all contribute to on the North Hill there. We can use that aquatics facility. We do not have the ability to use the amenities around the resort unless we were to join the Smuggler's Notch rental program. So those are 3 major differences between owning a condominium outright and what we have purchased. Basically, we've heard the expression, you know, it's comparing apples to orange, and it truly is. The demise of our group has not been as dramatic as the demise of the 2-week timeshare owners. And a lot of that is due to the fact that we have much more skin in the game from our investments and from our annual assessments that are due. We also have an easier time getting organized. Figure a timeshare building with 20 owners per unit. You're talking 120, 150 owners. It's impossible to get them organized, and that's why you can't change the use of that building. In Eagles, we only have 12 owners. In Kestrel's, 18. Falcons, 54. So several years ago, we did organize our group, the SNOSA group, and we have a lot of intelligent people, a lot of professionals, and we examined what our cost structures were and how could we try to make a go of it and not have the fire sale that the other owners in the timeshare world were having. And we have been successful in that. We've had our butting of heads with the resort because we have had to take over some of the cost items ourselves to try to make them more affordable. And we've had to grieve our taxes, but they were based on actual sales of the units, the options that we owned. So we're well aware that the market for our type of real estate has fallen apart. However, equitable tax principles say that you are required to pay taxes on the fair market value of the property. As I understand it, this is current Vermont law. I sort of make the analogy that if you owned a house on a lakefront property in Vermont, and for unfortunately an environmental disaster, a dump of chemicals or something killed the lake, and everyone's lakefront property value would plummet. The solution would not be to value the property as if it were on another unpolluted lake so as to prop up the grand list, or create a new rule for how to value those properties so that the owners could keep their values higher. That would be inequitable to those taxpayers, just as this proposed bill is inequitable to the owners that I represent. It is inequitable to tax people more when their property increases and then tax people more when the value of their property decreases. In other parts of Vermont, the values of properties are going way, way up, and the state is reaping that benefit, which is totally market driven. So I end the testimony not to come here and advocate for my group, which I do, but also to provide some thinking to you all as you go forward, because this is not an easy situation. And I would stress the first point that I would like to make is, in order to be equitable, I think you have to be patient in this situation. I think you need to let the marketplace determine the assessed value of our units. I can't, again, totally compare our units to the timeshare units that are being abandoned, but our units are out there in the marketplace. And I don't know, Madam Chair, whether Faith can display the document that I had put together, the table that would show some of the sales. But what it would show.
Probably can, but we are a half hour.
Okay, no
over
problem. But
schedule.
let me then
and
summarize.
I've got a couple doctors waiting, so I don't want to.
No problem. No problem.
Cancel them for
I'll
today.
finish up then. But to put it, is that we are assessed right now at Eagles for $160,000 for a half share. So $320,000 for the unit itself. We've had our first two sales, like I said, in 15, 20 years, and they averaged $160,000. So that right there is a market-driven transaction that should be used by the listers in Cambridge to value our property going forward. And we're sitting right now where that is. There are others in our group, in the Trailside Highlands group, where some of those units are going for 20,000, as Tom said, that people are just walking away. They're just trying to get whatever they can. Those are probably sitting on the listers list at maybe 50,000 for a third. So I'm just asking that instead of doing a snap thing here and treating everybody in the same boat, to be patient. I would also point out that you do look at California as perhaps a model, because they have valued, come up with a formula to take those timeshares and try to bring them up to the condominium level, but then have a series of subtractions based on the differences between, and they have a whole formula, which I don't want to get into, but I think that would be certainly worth exploring.
We're definitely going to be looking at other states, and California may be the only one.
Right. So the last point I want to make is that if S214 becomes law, the unintended consequence could very well be the opposite of what you would expect, of what you want. And that would be that there would be even more mass wholesale fire sales in this arena, because the property taxes now, we think in our group, are at a very fair level, and we can manage with that. They're fair, and we're happy to pay the fair share. If you were to go ahead and put us back up onto a different playing field, so to speak, our assessments would then go back up to areas where it would not make sense for some of these people to continue. But we're working to keep them in the fold, and that's what I would say. I think you've hit on something here with the corporate nature of some of these buildings. And I would like to end by just saying that Tom said originally that the reason why these are all in one building, set up by unit as opposed by individual owners, is that you would be impossible to try to collect. But when Wyndham is owning 50% of a building, the number of other owners is now shrinking. And as that number increases, there might be some solution where you work with the corporate entity to get the tax dollars that you need. Thank you, Finance Chair people and all your senators. Thank you for the time. I appreciate it. I'll answer questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your time. Mr. Storrow, Jill, I apologize. We didn't think the floor would go that long today, but I'm going to ask you to come back another day. I don't feel quite as bad sending you out into the snow because you're Zooming, which is good. But I'd like to give Mr. Mazur, the committee, a chance to ask him some questions. And then we're going on to genetic information and insurance. So committee, any questions for Mr. Mazur? Okay. Mr. Mazur, I have one. You think your present taxes are fair. Did your appraisal get significantly lowered with this last appeal? Or
The assessed value, yes. Not in all the buildings. No, in Eagles, I have the schedule here. Eagles, we went down 29%. The other more expensive units in Owls, they went down 35%. But in Trailside Highlands, they went down 75%. And they were all basically driven by people leaving.
Okay.
The answer to that of as to why Eagles and Owls have held their value, they are great buildings, they're maintained, and they have great views. And I think they're popular with people who do rent, and we've been able to maintain the cash flow to the best that we can.
Okay. Committee, any other questions? Okay, I think it's going to take us a little while to wrap our heads around this one. Because this is a new situation. It's a unique situation, and the old rules don't seem to apply easily. So I think we'll start looking at other states and trying to figure out a fair way to do these appraisals that's fair to the owners and to the towns. And yeah, if these just dropped for a year and then went back up as a corporate entity buys them out, and we could get an income estimate there, maybe it would work out if we were patient. But we've got towns taking a major hit, and I assume there's a 3-year rolling average on that, I believe, for your school taxes. So they aren't taking the $5 million hit all in one tax year, but they are taking it. And I don't even want to know what the weighting study's doing to Cambridge. So there's a lot changing for some of these towns. Okay, so thank you, everyone. And we are going to move on to S-247. And I'm going to try and move us through the witnesses here and then get you out at a reasonable hour. I think there are some other meetings. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you. Talk next week.
And thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mr. Mazur. And committee, I'm waiting. Damien is here. But our first witness is Senator Lyons. There she is. Okay. And as we thought we might, we have found there is an awful lot of interest in this bill as well. So that's Dr. Leonard. All right. Okay, so Senator Lyons, you're the sponsor. And my intention is once we've looked at the insurance impacts, I'm going to relinquish it to health and welfare. But insurance turned out to be a really big issue, or at least a lot of interest. So we're going to walk our way through that, and then you and I and our 3 co-conspirators down the hall.
So we have a majority right here, so go for it.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So anyway, I it's the time crunch. As fast as you can tell us what
very,
your purpose
very
is.
briefly, I will share with you how important S-247 is. This is a bill that we did have in our committee a last session, and we did pass it out to the full Senate, and eventually it was on the last day of the session, it went over to the House, but it was a slightly different bill with more sections and more provisions. This bill really deals more, as you now know, with long-term care insurance and life insurance. We know that in 2008, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act was passed at the federal level, protecting health insurance, so that we are under that umbrella. But we also know that with the onset of things like Ancestry and 23, whatever the 23andMe is.
23andMe.
Well,
My
thank
sister
you.
had ours done. I'm not all Irish.
And that and people believe that the looking at individual chromosomes might predict something about who we are. And we know that in the past we've looked at trying to understand single gene inheritance, color of eyes, for example. But as time has gone on, we've seen greater complexity in our genetic expression. And I should share with you that I am a professor of biology. I have taught cell biology and immunology for many years, so I have my feet on the ground with this one. But I will allow for Dr. Leonard and others to speak to the genomic medicine that's going on today and how very personal it is becoming and how much it can tell us about both prevention and treatment of diseases. But if that information is shared and becomes more publicly shared, then the concern is a very real concern about people not willing to share genetic information, even with their medical providers or with laboratories, when it could be to their advantage. So I believe that this bill is an important one. It will allow for folks to sign on whenever their genetic information is being shared and utilized, particularly in the medical environment. There's a section in the bill that provides for that no one's genetic information can be shared or utilized without some informed consent. So those things are all very important to us because our genome is us. It is us. And we know since we've learned greatly since the 90s, and I've done research on some of this area, how much the environment, both the chemical environment and the social environment, will influence genetic expression. So there is a lot embedded in the bill. I will not talk any further, but I think that allowing people protection of their own genome and non-discrimination is critically important. And I will end it there.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure we have time for all the other witnesses. Does anyone have a time constraint, Okay. This is normally when I do the non-professionals because it's snowing outside, but we're all Zooming. So I'm going to go on to Emily Brown, who is Director of Rates. There you are. Okay, Emily, Director of Rates and Forms from DFR. Thoughts?
Hi, so for the record, Emily Brown, I was the Director of Rates and Forms. I'm now the Director of Insurance Regulation at DFR.
Well, we got to update our
that's
list.
Okay.
Okay.
It's fairly new, so that's fine.
Yeah.
So at this point in time, the department does not support or oppose this bill, but what I thought it might be helpful to do, and I'll let you obviously decide, is if I walked through what our current law allows or requires.
Yeah, that would probably be a good foundation.
Yep. Okay. All right. So currently, and when I'm talking about all insurance. So I know that Senator Lyons mentioned life insurance and long-term care. What I'll be talking about is really the requirements for all insurance at this point, because it is all currently grouped into one section of our law. So as of now, insurers cannot use any medical information, including genetic testing, if it does not relate to the risk that is being insured. So the burden is on the insurance companies currently to prove that if they are using information in your medical record, that it actually is having an impact on the risk that they are assuming. Another piece of Vermont law, which I think is important to this discussion, is that insurers are not allowed to require any individual to undergo genetic testing in order to procure insurance. And then they're also not allowed to use any of a family member's genetic information unless it's in the policyholder's medical file. And I do believe that Vermont does currently have one of the strongest restrictive genetic testing laws in the country. And so I think I'll just leave it there. If there are any questions about how the current law is operating.
So currently, you cannot use genetic you cannot require a genetic test.
Correct.
For anything.
Exactly.
If one has been done and it's in your medical records,
right,
that either you or one of your siblings has the female gene that's connected with ovarian and other female cancers, that's in your medical record, and you are going for health or perhaps life insurance, then that information could be used because it impacts the risk and that influences your rate. If we didn't allow that to be used, does that mean that the pool as a whole that risk would get spread out?
Yeah, so just one clarifying piece before I answer your question. So for major medical or comprehensive health insurance, currently they are not allowed to underwrite. So if you are purchasing a plan through your employer or on the exchange, they are not allowed to underwrite you. So they can't look at your medical information currently.
Okay.
And reject or raise your premium based on if you have some genetic predisposition. But so what it would essentially do, or what the risk is that if an insurer, for instance, a life insurer, doesn't have access to information, maybe you've had a genetic test, and if they aren't allowed to access that information, that could then potentially lead to individuals who may know that they are at higher risk of something, then going and purchasing a policy, maybe for a higher amount than they would if they didn't have that information, or purchasing a policy when they wouldn't have previously without that knowledge.
Okay.
So that is a potential outcome. There's obviously, and I'm sure you'll hear about it later from the other witnesses, but there's also the risk of maybe people not undergoing genetic testing if they feel like they can't then procure a life insurance policy. And in this instance too, I do believe the bill is modifying not only for life insurance and long-term care, but it would also put restrictions on the ability of, for instance, disability insurance companies, I believe, sometimes use family medical history to determine your insurability. So I believe that the impact of this would extend beyond the long-term care and life insurance market and affect
So there's
other markets.
disability. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe workers' comp. All right. Questions for Emily at this point? And Emily, is there a chart somewhere with, what different kinds of insurance are allowed to consider?
Yeah. So right now, and are you just talking about for genetic testing, or are you talking about generally?
I think medical records and genetic testing, but if you've got it just generally,
well,
that might be helpful for us to have just to know where we're starting.
Yeah. And so, so currently as it stands, health insurance, major medical health insurance is the only line of insurance in our state where you cannot use an insured's medical record to determine insurability or underwriting or the premium that they'll be charged.
Conditions, yeah.
Exactly, and Medicare supplement, but that's kind of a different situation.
Okay,
so.
Yeah. All right, but you can in other insurances. All right, but you can't require that the test be done.
Exactly.
Okay. Any questions for Emily at this point? I am not seeing any, so I'm going to move to Jill Remick. I say welcome back. Not Remick, this is Rickard. I am going to have trouble with those names. I should never have them both on the same agenda. Welcome back, Jill Rickard. New hat. It wasn't too long ago you were here in another job, but welcome and tell us where you are now and what you'd like us to hear.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually used to get emails for Jill Remick, and she used to get them for me.
What,
so.
Jay? Yeah.
So thank you for having me. My name is Jill Rickard, and I am now representing the American Council of Life Insurers. I have with me as well Dr. Dave Rangachari, who serves as a medical director on behalf of ACLI, and he will be able to answer any.
I'm glad you
questions.
pronounced his name because I just massacred Mazer. So
yeah, Rangachari is it's Dr. or you can call him Dr. Dave.
Okay, I can do that.
So he can answer any technical questions you have about life insurance underwriting.
Okay.
So the American Council of Life Insurers is the leading trade association driving public policy and advocacy on behalf of the life insurance industry. 90 million American families rely on the life insurance industry for financial protection and retirement security. We have 280 member companies, and they represent 94% of industry assets in the US. Each day, life insurers pay out $3.6 million in life insurance and annuities to Vermont families and businesses, helping Vermonters secure the things that matter most through all stages of life.
Wait, did you just say $3.6 million a day to Vermont?
I believe that's
No,
right.
that's got to be.
Correct. I'll get back to you with the correct figure. I apologize. That's what I wrote down, but you may be right that it's not.
I
per
know
day.
it sounds high, but
it does. You're right. Let me check on that.
we
So
may,
sorry, Madam Chair.
have some big spenders there. So, okay. Yeah,
So
go check that one.
Thank you. The ACLI opposes S247. As Director Brown explained, unlike health insurers, life insurers have only one opportunity to evaluate a person's risk before issuing a policy that will remain in place for the person's lifetime, which could be 30, 40, 50 years. Once a policy is in place, a life insurer cannot cancel it or raise premiums because of changes in a person's health or because of subsequent test results. For that reason, it's very important that life insurers have access to an applicant's complete and accurate medical record, which could include family medical history and genetic information. Insurance, as you know, is based on a relatively simple concept. A group of people can collectively bear costs that would be too great for one member of the group to handle on their own. Grouping people together makes it possible for an insurer to offer affordable protection against financial loss. As Senator Bray correctly noted after last week's walkthrough, this bill would create an opportunity for adverse selection. If genetic information is available to life insurance applicants, but not life insurance underwriters, then people with a high risk of disease may be more likely to purchase insurance, and conversely, people with a lower risk may be less likely to purchase insurance. And people masking a higher than average risk based on their genetic test results could purchase policies at the same price as people with a very low risk. As a result, the risk experience in the insurer's pool could be altered, and this could ultimately destabilize the insurance pool and the market. To illustrate a basic example of adverse selection is if a smoker claims to be a non-smoker on their life insurance application and receives the non-smoking risk classification. If this happens often enough, then too many smokers get added to the non-smoking risk pool, then the premiums charged to the pool may be too low to account for the increased mortality and morbidity risks due to the number of smokers. The pool may eventually become financially unsound because the insurer is not collecting enough premiums to pay the higher rate of claims. Adverse selection is the greatest threat to insurers' ability to underwrite and price appropriately. Too many instances of adverse selection are likely to drive up costs for all future consumers and could affect the availability and affordability of insurance products. Life insurers' ask is simple. They want access to the same information that the applicant has at the time of application. They do not view genetic test results as separate and apart from a routine medical file. And they also don't view genetic test results as definitive. Test results do not dictate the issuance or non-issuance of a life insurance policy. Life insurers take a holistic approach in the underwriting, and they consider a wide range of factors, including the steps the person might be taking to manage their health risks. In fact, genetic information could benefit a consumer in life insurance. For example, a person with heart disease that's taking the appropriate medications may pay lower rates than a person who is doing nothing to address their health risks. In many cases, knowledge of a genetic condition encourages people to take a more active role in their personal health, which may in turn place them in a lower risk or a better risk category. Life insurers are in the business of issuing policies and want to provide life insurance products to as many people as possible, but also want to price those products accurately and make them as affordable as possible for all consumers. Today, 93% of people qualify for life insurance coverage the first time they apply. Vermont's existing laws regarding genetic testing already provide strong consumer protections and some of the strongest restrictions in the nation. I won't go into those as I was planning to do because Director Brown provided a good overview. But I do want to mention with respect to the privacy of genetic information, life insurers do not share or resell genetic information to third parties. Our members take consumer privacy very seriously and abide by a wide array of federal and state privacy laws, protecting not just genetic test results, but all health information. During last week's meeting, the committee asked whether other states have imposed similar prohibitions on the use of genetic information. In our neck of the woods, Connecticut was mentioned. Connecticut did enact a law in 2021, but that law is almost identical to the provisions already existing in Vermont statute. The Kinetico Law prohibits insurers from using the results of direct-to-consumer genetic testing, like 23andMe, without the informed written consent of the applicant. We don't oppose that. It also prohibits underwriting based on a requirement of the applicant to undergo genetic testing or the results of a genetic testing of an individual's family member if they're not contained in the medical record, which is what we have in Vermont law. I also want to touch on underwriting based on family medical history. As written, we read the bill as prohibiting the use of family medical history in life insurance underwriting. Underwriting based on family medical history is a long-standing practice in Vermont and in all other states, and no state currently prohibits this. However, I also understand based on the walkthrough last week that the carve out in section 3 of the bill, which would be added to 8 VSA 3702, is intended to allow life insurers to continue to underwrite based on family medical history, so long as there is a relationship between that history and the cost of the risk undertaken. If that is the intent, then to accomplish this purpose, the carve-out also needs to be added to the other relevant sections of law. In addition, we would request this exemption be permitted to apply to long-term care and disability income insurance. Finally, I want to mention, as I sort of briefly touched on, direct-to-consumer testing, such as 23andMe. The bill would prohibit insurers from requesting, requiring, purchasing, or using information obtained from these DTC genetic testing without the informed written consent of the individual who's been tested. We have no issue with this provision. Insurers do not use these test results, nor do they underwrite, or they don't access the test results, nor do they underwrite based on them. ACLI members are committed to a robust and competitive insurance market that offers a variety of products that are affordable and meet consumers' insurance needs. Life insurance companies have been able to provide affordable insurance coverage because applicants have shared with consent their complete medical records. It only makes sense that if a life insurance company is going to make a long-term promise, that it knows an applicant's true health condition. Finally, Vermont consumers have long benefited from accuracy, transparency, and confidentiality in the underwriting process. Prohibitions like those contained in S-247 would result in higher prices and fewer choices for Vermont consumers. Thank you for your time, and I would be glad to take any questions or to pass it off to Dr. Rangachari as well.
Okay. Dr. Rangachari, do you have anything to add at this point?
I would, if you don't mind. I think there's several good points. I would, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine.
I've heard several good points. Exactly. I think that maybe the two other things that I would want to make clear that have come up so far. The first one, and this is probably the number 1, 2, and 3 question that we get when these issues arise. Well, why can't you just, maybe raise the prices a little bit and spread that risk around the pool? What I would want to make clear is that in this particular case, and the way that this particular bill has been written, an insurer would not be allowed to limit the amount that is applied for. So if an individual would normally apply for, say, $300,000, but now they knew they had a markedly reduced life expectancy, it would make all the sense in the world for that individual to apply for $3 million. Well, wait, why not stop there? Why not 10 million, 30 million? That kind of risk cannot be spread around. But let me make it also more clear than how extreme of a bill it would be to completely ban the use of predictive diagnostic testing, genetic testing in Vermont. This bill, of course, would not be limited to the residents of Vermont. And what this bill then, any single person from the Northeast, or honestly, literally, the entire country would be able to go in to get into Vermont and get a policy that they would not be able to get in any other state in the union when you consider that addition of family history in particular. And so what this bill would be asking for were the residents of Vermont to shoulder the entire burden of the nation's unsustainable policies. There again, not limited by a face amount. So for that, I just want to make as clear as possible, we're not exaggerating, that this has real threats to the availability and the pricing of life insurance within Vermont. The third point that I would just want to make briefly is forget about all the, for a moment, about the financial impacts. I want to speak to it for a moment from the fairness impact, because I think if you just look at it from that, so, well, boy, it doesn't really kind of seem fair to use the genetic information. What I would want to make clear as a medical director, every day we see applications for people with all sorts of diseases that they didn't ask for. We see people with multiple sclerosis, we see people with genetic information, and we see people, say, for example, with spinal cord injury that has nothing to do with genetic information. We make a commitment, a pledge to not play favorites in terms of medical disease, right? We go by the life expectancy, and we don't pick and choose in terms of who we would apply a premium for. We don't make those decisions around fairness. So with that, thanks very much for the opportunity, and I'll happy also to entertain any questions.
Okay, any questions for Jill or Dr. Ranjikari at this point? All right. Again, I think we're all on a very steep learning curve here. Some of us heard from, I believe, Dr. Leonard last year. I think, were you in? Yeah, you were in health and welfare. I think but the rest of this committee has not. So, Dr. Leonard, I'm going to go to you, and then Dr. Wilden.
Thank you, Senator Cummings, and members of the Senate Finance Committee. My thanks to the senators who sponsored S-247, including Senator Hardy from this committee. My name is Deborah Leonard. I'm here today to ask for your support of S-247, a bill that would protect Vermonters from discriminatory practices based on their genetic information. To introduce myself, I am the chair and a professor of the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at the University of Vermont Health Network and the Robert Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont. In addition to my medical training, I have a doctorate in molecular biology, which is the study of genetic material used to control cell and body functions. My medical specialty is called molecular pathology or genomic medicine, which focuses on testing of genetic material, specifically DNA and RNA. I won't give you the longer technical names of those, for medical purposes, including for cancer, infectious diseases, and inherited diseases. I've practiced for almost 30 years and seen major advances during the course of my career, including testing advancements that allow us to know the genetic sequence of an individual's genome for medical purposes, for research, or even for an individual's curiosity about their genomic information. I've served on a National Genomics Committee advisory to the Secretary of Health and Human Services and a National Academies of Medicine Genomics Roundtable. In Vermont, we are transitioning our healthcare and payment models to a focus on early detection and even prevention of disease to keep people as healthy as possible. Overall health and well-being are determined by many factors. About 60% of overall health is based on social determinants, such as education level, income, which can determine access to housing, food, and medical care, and personal behaviors such as exercise, smoking, and diet. Information about all of these health determinants would still be available for life insurance companies to use for their underwriting, along with personal and family medical history. Medical care only contributes about 10% to overall health and well-being. The other 30% is determined by an individual's genetics, yet we do not routinely use this information in healthcare. The University of Vermont Health Network is changing this. On November 1st, 2019, we began offering genomic testing to our patients through a group of our primary care providers, working to integrate genetically determined health risks into the care of our patients. While we often think about genetic risks as rare conditions, genetic diseases are associated with approximately 6,000 of our 20,000 genes. And we are finding that single gene genetic disorders affect about 20% of the Vermont population, and carrying a genetic change that could cause a disease in your children is present in about 80% of Vermonters. By identifying genetically driven disease risks before the onset of symptoms, we are able to monitor for disease onset, to identify the early stages of disease when interventions may be more effective, to provide appropriate treatments because we have a diagnosis, and in some cases mitigate the onset of symptoms or disease through lifestyle changes or medical intervention. So genetic information is not always deterministic of disease severity or outcomes without options for healthcare interventions. I'd like to, if you'll allow me, share a personal story. My husband, Greg Merhar, and I gave each other our genome sequences for Christmas in 2014 and received our results in 2015. My results were rather boring, but Greg's results were life-changing. Greg's genome showed genetic changes that cause a genetic disease called familial Mediterranean fever, or FMF. We realize now that Greg had symptoms of FMF since he was a child, but the symptoms are not very specific, although very severe, and include extreme abdominal pain, slow healing of injuries, and general aches and pains. Over his lifetime, Greg underwent many medical studies and tried many over-the-counter remedies, but nothing worked. We didn't have a diagnosis. To our surprise and joy, we found that FMF is treatable with a drug called colchicine, a drug also used to treat gout. Greg has been taking colchicine since 2015 and is largely pain-free. He says he met me so he could get a diagnosis and feel better. His primary care physician has patients with FMF, but didn't really think about FMF as a cause for Greg's symptoms because Greg does not look Mediterranean. He has blonde hair and blue eyes. So genetic identification of disease risks can help physicians also consider diagnoses they may not otherwise think about. And genetic results can be life-changing for people. Unlike Greg and me, who were just curious and bold about learning our genomic information, many people fear the misuse of their genetic information, so may not agree to have genetic testing to inform their health and healthcare. The Federal Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA, of 2008 only protects Americans from health insurance and employment discrimination based on their genetic information, but does not protect against other forms of discrimination based on genetic information. Vermonters may see the risks of genetic discrimination as greater than the potential health benefits and not agree to have genetic testing to inform their healthcare. These risks are documented in articles my colleague Jason Williams shared with the committee. S247, if passed, would more fully protect Vermonters from discrimination based on their genetic information, including life insurance and long-term care insurance, and help ensure Vermonters feel safe having genetic testing to help understand their disease risks and can take appropriate preventative measures to improve it. As we are already moving forward with broader use of preventive genetic testing here in Vermont, these protections will be important for Vermonters to benefit from this advancement in healthcare. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Questions for Dr. Leonard? Senator Bray.
Thank you, Dr. Leonard. It's great to have you joining us here today, especially given how deeply you know the subject matter. So I'm just curious about how you think about the issue of adverse selection. So I'm entirely supportive of the idea. I'd hate to have people fearful from getting a test because they might think the information would then lead to negative consequences for them financially or otherwise. And then maybe foregoing diagnosis the way your husband had it, and then treatment. So that's definitely not anything that anyone wants. But I'm just wondering if someone does undergo some sort of genetic analysis, finds something, and it has consequences, and it then drives adverse selection. How do you sort that one out?
So while I like to think of Vermont as leading in the US and in healthcare reform, and we are, the United Kingdom is also offering genomic testing and has protections against misuse of genetic information and use of this information in life insurance underwriting. And there have been no adverse effects on underwriting or life insurance companies in the UK. Canada likewise does not allow this. Florida and California also have laws in the United States that prevent this. So there have not been adverse outcomes with these types of blocks on using genetic information that is not part of the medical record, and medical and family history can be used. So from family history, you get some genetic information.
Sure. Okay.
In other places where this has been done, there has not been a negative impact.
Okay. If the genetic testing is part of your medical record, because insurers can't require that you have a genetic test now.
Right.
But if there's a family history, of a certain cancer, I know I'm always asked, that would be okay to use. But if there has been a test done on your sister and it says, that the gene is there for that whole array of female cancers, ovarian being the big one, the insurance company could not use the test or could not know about the test.
Correct. So right now they can use the family history that you have a sister who had early onset breast cancer and even had genetic testing if it is in your medical record that shows that there is a BRCA1 or 2 gene mutation that caused this.
But you couldn't use
breast
that.
Breast and ovarian cancer.
Yeah.
And by you having that testing, whether you have to undergo the same procedures your sister did or whether you don't. And that is very important information for a patient to feel safe.
Yes.
And if we know that studies have been done and patients refuse to have the testing because of a fear of not being able to get life, long-term care, or disability insurance.
Okay,
So this should not
but
be
once you
by
buy a
insurers.
life insurance policy, so I can see if you're 22 and you don't have life insurance. But once you buy a life insurance policy, they are not privy to any test you would do. I think that was, I see, Doc. So we're dealing with this, probably a fairly small group.
Well, right now in Vermont, it's becoming a larger and larger group of people who will have genetic information in their medical record. And we have to inform them that Dr. Wilden will talk about this. We have to inform them of the risks that they may not be able to get life insurance, or it will cost more, or long-term care insurance or disability insurance. And some of our patients are choosing not to get this testing done. And yet,
that's their choice.
Finding that 20% of people we test have something that's medically important, and 80% of them are carriers for a disease that could be passed on to their children and show up unexpectedly.
Okay. Other questions? Dr. Leonard, you said you had submitted to the committee, and I've got my documentation, or you said your colleague had, but I think you may be thinking of the Health and Welfare Committee.
Jason Williams should have provided my testimony to the committee. Otherwise, I can provide it to Faith.
I'm just looking for the documentation that shows statistics for how many people refuse to go forward because they're afraid they can't get life insurance. I think that was the context. You said there was documentation.
There are articles that Jason Williams provided.
Has Jason been here?
We can provide
Maybe
that.
he was last week. I've got the wrong screen up, but I just want to make sure we get that information. Okay. Any questions for Dr. Leonard right now? Okay, we're going to go on to Dr. Robert Wilden. And Dr. Wilden, just tell us your name, because we need a voice to go with the name on the tape, and who you represent, and the floor is yours.
Wait, Madam Chair, if
yes.
I may, just 1 second, just to clarify for what Dr. Leonard just said. I think he sent it to us on the 24th of January.
Okay.
And he's essentially the lobbyist for UVM Medical Center. So that's why he sent it.
Okay.
Yeah, just so you know.
If it was there, I didn't think we had heard from him, but if it is on, if we've got it, then that's fine. Okay. I just want to make sure we have it.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Dr. Rangashandri had his hand up for a question. I don't know whether you want to go with that or me first.
Wait, who had their hand up? I'm
Dr.
getting notes here on.
Dave Rangashandri.
I have you on my agenda, and I think you're the Dr. Ranchari, you had your hand up?
Yes, I think that's very generous, Dr. Bull. I just wanted to make one quick comment, because it was brought up that there are legislations in other jurisdictions there, but two things. Number one is that those would, in many cases, limit the amount that we're talking about to the hundreds of thousands there. This bill has no such limitation. And the second is that this bill would introduce family history into that ban. By our reading, there is no law of such in the nation or otherwise. I see some shaking of heads, so that if that's not the intent, that's welcome shaking of heads, and obviously look forward to that conversation.
Okay, we will go through this, but basically, if there was some limit, like if you were going to take out $1 million policy, something above the norm, that further testing might be allowed. That would
What I would
And
say is
limit adverse selection.
there are all sorts of avenues to provide reasonable protections that we've worked at now in dozens of states for both consumers and patients alike. And so absolutely hope and open to any of those types of things short of what this bill would do, which is an all-out ban on predictive diagnostic testing.
Okay, so we will take a look at other states before making any decisions. So I'm going back to Dr. Wilden. And I probably massacred your name too.
No, actually, you got it perfect. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. One for me this week.
Great. All right. Good afternoon, Senator Cummings, Senator Lyons, and members of the Senate Finance Committee. I am really grateful for the opportunity to explain today why I ask you to support S-247, a bill to prevent discrimination based on inborn and unchosen genetic characteristics, principally before they cause symptoms or even diagnosed. I'm a medical geneticist. I specialize in the diagnosis, management, and counseling of individuals and families affected by genetic disease. My clinic is at the Children's Specialty Center of the UVM Medical Center in Burlington. I and my geneticist and genetic counselor colleagues see patients of all ages who already have genetic disease or who have symptoms that might signal a genetic condition. We also see healthy people who have a blood relative diagnosed with a genetic disease and are worried they may come down with the same thing. People who want to expand their family worry about passing something on they may not even know they have. Genetic testing is one of the tools we offer them, but it comes with a catch for those who don't have any symptoms. In seeking the knowable risks, they can lose access to resources and services many of us take for granted, like life insurance. It's difficult to watch as people try to make the best decision for themselves and their families under this odd paradox. For most of my career, the only way to prevent disease was through family planning, and for a very few rare disorders, special diets. This is changing. More and more treatments exist for both rare and common genetic conditions. At the beginning of my career, children with cystic fibrosis rarely lived past 20. And people with Marfan syndrome often died before 35. Now, people with Marfan syndrome who are diagnosed early have a normal lifespan. And thanks to improved care and amazing breakthrough medicines, people with cystic fibrosis may live to be as old as you or I. Cancer is more treatable when it is detected at early stages. Early treatment also costs less and has less impact on one's family and livelihood. The same is true for genetically driven disease. Marfan syndrome and cystic fibrosis have early signs that astute healthcare providers can recognize. But many genetic disorders destroy silently, undetected in routine care. Genetic susceptibility leads to advanced cancer at young ages when it's not on anyone's radar. Susceptibility to heart rhythm disorders can end teenagers' lives suddenly, something that, if known in advance, is preventable. Screening for genetic susceptibility, either in those with disease in their family or with DNA screening tests, allows for early medical treatment. Even without preventative options, education for self-efficacy helps people at risk recognize warning signs, and when they occur, seek care immediately. We don't know everything about how to use hidden information in one's DNA to improve health and well-being. But we know enough to make a difference. We manage uncertainty, as we do always in medicine, and we learn something every day. People deserve a choice to have that information and share it with their healthcare providers without fear that it will disadvantage them in their desire to protect themselves and their family. Fear of negative consequences, real or imagined, has dramatically impacted willingness to take even simple measures that reduce the risk of death or disability. We've experienced that intensely over the last year. Within the realm of genetics, scientific studies have found that people often choose not to get genetic testing because legal protections against non-health uses of the information are incomplete. And I'll insert here that many of those people, if they got genetic testing, would find out that they aren't at risk and don't have to complete a bunch of medical screenings just because they're at risk by family history. So they lose the opportunity to find out that they're actually not at risk. Amazingly, this state officially recognizes this gap as real. Both Vermont and New York require people seeking medical genetic testing to sign a written informed consent that includes information on the risk of non-health insurance discrimination. So as a physician, what that means to me is I'm charged by the state with informing someone of a risk that they may have if they get genetic testing that's protecting the interests of an entirely different industry. The state also recognizes the value of early detection and treatment in the routine process called newborn screening. We screen every baby to prevent death and permanent disability from a small number of treatable genetic disorders. I'm here to support S247 because it will help people to gather and use their own private genetic information to take control of their own risks without fear of losing something else. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a copy of that informed consent you could email to us?
Yes.
Okay, that would be good to see. Senator Bray.
Thanks, Dr. Wilden. Just a quick question. Yeah, we're all coming in as a committee into this discussion now, but I'm just wondering in how many years this will be, would you think that this might become routine part of your medical care, that we will use this kind of screening as part of, you may not even need to be sort of called out as particularly at risk. It'll just be an ordinary screening procedure.
So an ordinary screening procedure like colonoscopy for colon cancer or mammography for breast cancer beginning at a certain age. And what we would do if someone has a predisposition to those is to start those screenings earlier. And it's hard to predict. We're trying to pilot that idea right now. And it seems to be giving us useful information. And so it's really a matter of how quickly we can sort of diffuse that idea and disseminate it and make sure that it's not a financial barrier for people so that everyone can get the same benefit.
I mean, I think part of the reason I'm asking is kind of a closing, either opening or closing the door in the barn after the animal's gone. So it's making me think if we are I'd love to know how many people we're preventing from moving forward. And if that number is going to only grow year by year, then that would be of concern.
Yeah, I think that's what we're concerned about. I mean, we know that it's impacting people now, even when they only come in because of a family history, of genetic disease. But when we, begin screening people that aren't known to have a family history of that, then that could be a much larger group of people who would potentially refuse that opportunity.
And I think the area that this committee is focused on is, it seems to be life insurance, not medical insurance, and trying to limit the adverse selection. I mean, if I didn't want my life insurance impacted by a genetic test, I think I'd go out and buy the life insurance 2 days before I got the genetic test. Maybe I'm just cagier than other people, but I think it's finding out that, and I am forgetting the disease, but you're almost guaranteed to die in your 40s. Yeah, folk singer, not Arlo, Arlo's father, Woody Guthrie, died from it. If I knew I had that and I was 29 or 35, I might be inclined to go out and buy $1 million life insurance policy, knowing I might only live 4 or 5 years. So I wasn't ever really going to pay off that policy. And that, a couple of those, a million, 3 million, could make life insurance less affordable. And then I don't know if they could come into this state and buy an insurance policy they couldn't in another state. So I think we need to look at that. I don't think we want to deny people life insurance, but I think we do want to prevent them from, really impacting the life insurance market so that you end up pricing other people out of it. So I think we'll look at that. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if any of our witnesses and perhaps particularly the folks representing insurance could just help me understand from your point of view right now the problem when you have access to the genetic history. All of the specter that we're discussing right now exists today, and the insurance risk and the actuarial risk is all sort of the same today. And as I listen to the discussion, I'm sort of wondering, well, okay, we're helping individuals understand their particular situation, but the pool of Vermonters in this case looking to buy life insurance, the health isn't changing. So help me understand what I guess you've mentioned the cap and maybe we could look at that, but help me understand what really is the difference, because I guess I'm not seeing it.
So well, first of all, to be clear, we're not advocating for a change here. And what the basic principle that we're advocating to maintain is one that we call a level playing field that is central to the core of life insurance underwriting. And that's basically that whatever information is available to the applicant, that if they are looking to buy a voluntary policy at the amount that they choose, that they are willing to share that information with the insurer and not keep selective pieces of information available, especially then to Senator Cummings' point. I think she's referring to Huntington's disease.
I am.
Absolutely correct, that if you have a markedly lower life expectancy and you knew that, then it would only make all the sense in the world to buy an enormous policy. To her point, that she would have gotten that testing 2 days before, gotten the policy 2 days before getting the genetic testing, we would be fully supportive of that. Because again, the idea here is that you are level with your understanding of your own medical history. And we would absolutely encourage and have encouraged with genetic counselors and physicians that open, transparent discussion around insurance before the genetic testing is pursued. Our only ask is once the genetic testing is pursued and the results are negative, that it seems only at that point to be fair and reasonable in terms of the sharing of information. One more point I just have to make, and I apologize, to be absolutely clear in Dr. Wilden's example, that if there were an adverse family history, but the genetic testing were negative, well, the way that the law is written is that you could not use that negative genetic testing in favor of the person applying for insurance. So that's the kinds of idiosyncrasies that happen when you try to move for these complete bans on certain types of principles.
And you it's been testified that this kind of a bill is law in Florida and Canada and the UK. Are you predicting the market's insolvent there? I mean, is it crashing? What would we know, or what are you seeing in the places that have already made this change?
Two comments on that. So one is the UK and other countries, an entirely different, of course, system around that, but an entirely different law, in particular, a marked limitation in other jurisdictions in terms of the amount that we're talking about, right? So a moratorium in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and other countries have said, okay, for these, 6 conditions, there will do principles around that, but for the remainder of conditions, it's a different set of principles. There are other jurisdictions where it's entirely too early. I mean, life insurance is a long, lens business, right? And we're talking in some cases about laws that are, 2 years on the books. The final thing I'll mention about Canada, of course, is that is a federal bill, and there you don't then run into the issue of one state doing something that the entire rest of the nation is not doing, and then people being able to come into that state to purchase insurance selectively.
We already have that with Florida.
Florida there has that, but they do not have the family history piece. And again, I don't want to present Florida as going well, right? Because we are already hearing those stories out of Florida where people are not able to use information in favor of the applicant as examples. And then types of things where insurers would love to partner with applicants in terms of bringing out these types of testing, encouraging these types of testing, but not being able to incorporate that type of testing into product because of the way that the Florida law is written. So I wouldn't portray the Florida law as going well.
Okay. I'm going to go to Senator Bray.
A quick question. It's probably, again, for one of the folks representing insurers is, I'm just trying to think all the way around the issue. And one thought that occurs to me is if people get tested, they're probably highly motivated if they discover something to pursue a course of treatment that's beneficial to them. So it also seems as though it could confer a benefit on the people you're insuring, as in they discover something that might have gone undiscovered and would develop further for longer. And by finding out sooner, they may have better than predicted outcomes because they've been proactive. So is there no benefit that accrues to that side?
Oh, yeah.
I think you've been at this for longer than you're letting on, because these are the exact types of questions that we go through. And these are the types of questions that we go through when we make individual ratings and actuarial assessments. They're absolutely, you're exactly right. We take in both the negative factors and the positive factors, and we make the fairest assessment possible. But that's all we're trying to say here is don't remove only one side of the equation, because the actuary is going to be the first person to raise his hand or her hand and say that's not sustainable.
Okay, so right now, you cannot require genetic testing. So the only way you can get genetic information is if it's in the medical record. And I'm assuming if I wanted to have a test done and not have it sent to my general practitioner, I could prevent that information from being sent to my doctor. So it would not be in my medical record. Might be on the computer somewhere. So right now you have access to my medical record, which I have some control over, and you have access to my family history. What this would prevent is if in my medical record, it said that my sister or my mother had genetic testing and these were the results. You could not know that. You could know now whether or not my mother, my grandmother, and my father had all died of heart disease, but you rely pretty much on me to tell you the truth. If I don't want to tell you the truth, it's not there. I mean, my doctor relies on me to tell her the truth about family history. So I'm wondering, I want to see the information on how many people actually don't get genetic testing because they're afraid they won't get life insurance. And then I want to see what other states that ban genetic information do about limits on life insurance. I don't think I want to become a mecca for people if they are able to come here. I somehow just don't think you can walk into Vermont and buy a life insurance policy if you're not a resident, but I'm going to check that out. And I don't, Emily popped back up. Can I just drive over the border from New Hampshire and buy a life insurance policy?
You cannot. So legally,
I
you're
think
supposed
so.
to have a Vermont residence to be able to purchase life insurance in the state. I'm not sure.
but
I'm not sure if that's how it works all the time.
Yeah, if I had a second home here and I lived here 4 or 5 months of the year, I assume I could get, I've got a Vermont residence, so I could under those circumstances. All right. But I couldn't just drive in from Ohio and buy a policy.
I'll defer to Ms. Brown on that. I obviously would very much want that check because in our understanding in other discussions, it's any contract in which the state is signed. Regardless, we're talking about multiple millions of dollars available. And the question is would you change your state of residence if the answer were multiple millions of dollars?
That I could leave to my family because I know, yeah, okay. I have a feeling we may be dealing in some extreme cases. So I want to see if we can get a hold of NCSL and there may be NCOIL has some NA, yeah. There's enough insurance organizations out there to see what the experience has been, what other states' laws are and what their experience has been. I will grant you that other countries have very different systems. So I think we're going to look at this country and we'll see where we go from there. All right. Because the insurance is really what we need to be looking at. And right now it is after 5. And so I thank everybody for hanging with us. This is the legislature. The floor went long and everything got pushed back. So I appreciate you being with us and I'm glad I'm not sending you out into the snow. I hope many of you are Zooming from home, or at least at your offices. And thank you all. And we will, committee, if you think of anybody you'd like to hear from or questions, email them in and we'll try and get some witnesses and see if we can't get this one out. We've got a couple big bills we do need to get out. So thank you all and I'll see you all tomorrow.